Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January 2021 meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency Board held in public. My name is Stephen Lightfoot, so I'm the one over here that's talking. I'm the chair of the agency board, and so my role today is to lead us through today's agenda and create a really good discussion on some important topics. And probably the most important points we want to talk about today are our Chief Executive's report, really a state of the nation. The impact of the new trade and cooperation agreement with the European Union, its impact not just on the agency, but also importantly on the supply of medical products to patients. We want to talk about our plans to introduce a new registration system for medical devices and also the key deliverables for the agency as far as the complete review is concerned. Now, we're going to use the same video conferencing technology that we used at the last meeting. And we'll also be recording the meeting so that we can publish the video on our website and our internal intranet site. And in fact, actually, this has been a really successful initiative because we had 262 viewings of our October meeting video and 237 viewings of our November meeting video. So I think this technology is enabling to reach more members of the public than we would have been able to achieve through a traditional face-to-face meeting. And personally, I'm absolutely delighted with that as an opportunity. Now, today's audience consists of 66 people who are observing us today, and that includes 21 people who are representing patients and also patient groups. We've got 12 people from other health organisations, interested parties and the press, and we've got 33 members of our own staff. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
We look as though we've lost our chair for the moment.
David, if it helps, I can take the CEO report anytime if it would help keep things moving. And then as soon as Stephen reconnects, we can then come back to the minutes and matters arising.
Well, of course, just to check though whether there are any apologies or declarations of interest before we move on. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest? In which case, June, I think we should move on to you.
David, sorry, I have my hand raised for a declaration of interest. It's Bruce.
Yes, Bruce.
I've been asked to make a declaration of interest for something that I may be involved with. I will be presenting to the board in due course this morning the plans for a new medical device registration system. I have been approached very recently by an organisation called Academic Health Solutions to work on a consultancy basis with an organisation called the PSC, which is working with the DHSC and with NHS England to look at ways of leveraging information from trusts as part of this initiative to try and see how it will work. I've had conversations with the chairman and within the agency, and I've been advised that there really could be nothing but advantage to the agency for this, because it will mean that I'm keeping a finger on the pulse, both of what's happening strategically within the agency and at a more local level and with NHSX, with whom we want to collaborate. So, but it will be on a consultancy basis. So that is my declaration. The contract has yet to be signed in detail.
Okay, that's very helpful, and I will let Jude follow up if she needs any more detail on that for the minute. And Stephen, I think, is back.
I'm back now. I'm very, very sorry. I'm not quite sure what happened to my connection. It just seemed to drop. So thank you, David, for filling in.
We're at the minutes and actions from the last meeting.
Excellent. So in terms of, have we had the, we've done the apologies, have we, I take it? Yeah. Okay. So let's move on then to the actions from the minutes from the last meeting. So can I just check if there are any issues of accuracy on the minutes first, as a matter of course? No, I'm taking a silence as that's absolutely okay then. Okay, if we move on to the actions then. So looking at the actions here, the first one was obviously to present an overview of device registries, and that's something that's on the agenda, so we'll cover that. The second item was to arrange a board seminar to discuss how we can engage patients. And what I'd like to do there is to suggest that we delegate that action to the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee in the first instance, because I think we need to really review this in detail and then come back to the board with a well thought through proposal. So my proposal there will be to to delegate that to that committee. Mercy, I think you're content with that. We've talked about that before.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Okay. In terms of providing an update to the board on the Memorandum of Understanding with NICE, June Rain and I have been talking about actually how we can work with NICE more closely on a range of issues. And so on that basis, we don't want to just simply remain with the existing Memorandum of Understanding. And June and I are having a meeting with the Chair and Chief Executive of NICE. You know, that actually I think he's going to be right towards the end of February, and I'm hoping to have another one at the beginning of January. So we'll update the board in due course on that. But I think there's a real opportunity to work very closely with NICE, and they're a key stakeholder as far as we're concerned. The next action was holding a board seminar discussion on diversity and inclusion. And again, I'd like to delegate that to the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee in the first instance. But certainly, as Mercy is also a board champion for diversity, I've asked Anthony to invite Mercy to that particular discussion. And again, then we can get the assurance back to the board from that particular committee. The terms of reference for the board assurance committees are on the agenda, so we'll talk about those shortly. The next item was around conducting a board review of CPRD. John Fundry and I have had a discussion. I think actually it'd be useful to have more of a workshop type session where we can have a real discussion around not just where we are with CPRD, but also more importantly where we might want to go to. And that feels that it's more useful to have that in a seminar type discussion, something that's more informal than perhaps in a formal board meeting. I think then in terms of the MHRA enforcement group, linking that with the business plan, that's part of the Size and Shape programme. Sam, I understand that's been included already in the deliberations for the Size and Shape programme, so I think we can say that action is completed. Reviewing the agency fee structure, that's certainly not, that's a longer term aim and will require involvement with Department of Health and many other stakeholders, so that's why that's not due until June. The 2-year delivery plan, John, that's very much underway. You know, obviously we've set ourselves getting that ready for the start of the new financial year. It's still in the development phase, but you know, we'll be able to give the board an update on that in due course. In terms of seconding lay members to the Patient and Safety Assurance Committee, the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee as it is now, Mercy's already done that. So Susan and Sarah, who were lay members of the board previously, have been asked and were delighted to be asked to be involved in this committee. So that is great. And we've sent out the meeting invitations for the board meetings in 2021, which is basically the 3rd Tuesday of every month. So that's really the intention. So I think actually we've made good progress on the actions, even though it's been over the festive period. Were there any other matters arising either from those actions or from any others? No? Okay, so I think we can take those actions as read then. Okay, so in terms of then moving through into the agenda, I think that will be an appropriate time. And again, apologies again for the technical issues there. But June, would you like to talk about what are the current key issues from the Chief Executive's point of view?
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. I'm June Rain, I'm the Interim Chief Executive, and I'm very pleased to present this report for January, bringing together our current areas of focus and probably setting the scene for some of the important discussions to come. I'm sure it's been clear to everyone reading the report, it's been a tremendously busy time, despite the Christmas and New Year period, with a number of important priorities that have been running concurrently. So what I'll do just now is simply highlight 3 main messages. Our focus on healthcare access remains our key deliverable. Yes, 3 COVID-19 vaccines have had emergency approval, and we're also very much focused on the COVID-19 tests situation. We're focusing on enabling innovation following the completion of the transition period from the EU to get products to patients in even less time than we have up to now. And we're focusing too on the growing opportunities for international collaboration, again to accelerate access to new healthcare products. So a big focus on access. Having said that, patient safety is always our first priority, and we haven't taken our eye off the ball in that regard. Our public consultation on isotretinoin continues due to close on the 2nd of Feb, And we're looking forward to our expert working group really distilling those important contributions and then having a specific meeting to hear directly from patients. As you'd have seen, there have been a number of alerts and recalls. That's business as usual for us. For example, an antibiotic that had a contaminating organism in it. And a particularly important review that's been published now, we'll come back to, I'm sure, concerns the use of anti-epileptic drugs in pregnancy. So patient safety, our top priority. But before I finish, I do want to highlight our staff in the full flow of all this work, but in lockdown. And the executive committee and I are only too aware of all the pressures this has created. Our staff are our key asset to deliver all the ambitious programs I've mentioned. So our diversity and inclusion lead is moving forward a very interesting program of work. And we have a mental health at work champion in the shape of our Chief Officer, Sam Atkinson. We're having more frequent staff meetings to keep everybody up to speed and involved in our change program. And I'm sure you'll have noticed that we do celebrate success in terms of civil service awards. The one that's going for the moment, Science Award, we're in the running for with our innovative synthetic data supporting medtech innovation. This is digital health. So we're trying to always celebrate those achievements. The key messages there, and colleagues, very intensive work on access to products, particularly vaccines, safety our top priority, and really a chance for me personally to highlight the efforts and commitment of all our staff. Very happy now to open for discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, June. I think also as a starting point, we should just as a board just record our thanks to all of the staff who worked over Christmas and New Year. This wasn't just people working on COVID, it was people working with the EU transition, people involved in the safety systems and you know, the IT department as well. So, you know, I think there's a massive effort went into that, and so a really heartfelt thanks to who actually put themselves out to do the right thing for patients in this country. So thank you very much for that. And I think, Natalie, if we could record the board's thanks for that, that would be helpful. Just before I open up to questions, could I just ask maybe the first point from my side, Jude? Obviously, we've talked about the, on paragraph 9, you talk about the launch of the new innovative licensing and access pathway. The board's obviously seen various early iterations of that, but I think it'd be quite useful if maybe the board could have a presentation on what the final proposal is. And I was just wondering when the right time to do that would be.
That's a great idea, because I think the more minds get put into how this is working, the better. It's very much focusing on partnerships and patient involvement and building in those various perspectives so that by the time of approval, a product can really be taken up into use without unnecessary delay. And so I think with every iteration, I think it's going to improve and strengthen the plans. Although we've had a pilot, this is very much early days. Yeah. We've had some products coming through, and we could also share at a board discussion the experience and the learnings from those early examples. Very important, but each one rather unique. And I do think that perhaps an early discussion, we'll probably work with you as soon as February, would enable liftoff, because this is going to be quite a challenge, but a massive opportunity.
Well, it's important for patients, but it's also important for the innovation of new products, and so that's that's the real opportunity that I see. So I think early board engagement is good, but it has to be at a time that works, so it's going to add value to the executive team. So I understand that. Okay, so maybe Natalie, you can take that as an action for June and I to identify the best time to review the innovative licensing and access pathway, please, on the minutes. Okay. Questions for June. There's a whole range of topics there. Who would like to kick us off? Michael.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, June. Michael. Very clear presentation, and I'd echo Stephen's thanks to all your colleagues for what you're doing. I've got two questions. In the media at the moment, there's a lot of emphasis on global competitiveness in the production of vaccines and getting them out to people. Could you say a little bit about how we are sharing information, because we have been quite successful in what we've done, and that how we're doing that with other regulators? And my second point really relates to the debate that's going on among anti-vaxxers, and I know you've done a lot on television to emphasize the safety of the vaccines, but are we getting, how is that being followed up? And I'm interested in what Rachel might have to say in terms of our comms more widely within the United Kingdom.
Thank you. In relation to other regulators, this is a very active area at a number of levels. We've mentioned the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities as an important umbrella for a number of strands of work. And I'm pleased to say Sam Atkinson is helping work with Canada on particular areas of policy. On the vaccines particularly, we have led in the area of vigilance. And the UK's early experience with the Pfizer and the AZ vaccines has enabled us to share very quickly emerging issues. So ICMRA, an important umbrella. Then we have the Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland Access Consortium, which again has very regular and very, if you like, open interactions as the board would expect. Not just on safety, but also on the emerging products that are coming through. So we're all learning from one another and sharing perspectives, scientific perspectives on the data. Access has a particular subgroup that looks at COVID, vaccines, therapeutics as they're coming through. And then of course, we have bilaterals as necessary with our European Medicines Agency. There is if need be, an access that we can share information in the interests of public health, and obviously FDA as well. So I hope that helps illustrate to the board that this is a very active two-way interchange with other regulators, because health matters here, but it matters globally. And the more we can do to build on our early experience, the numbers being vaccinated now in this country really are going up exponentially, and the more we can share that experience, the better. The second area of the anti-vax is something that we contribute to, but very much led by Public Health England and the DHSC. So we're there to help by providing that solid reassurance on the robust evidence that feeds into the decisions that are made. And openness, transparency of our public assessment reports, the fact that how we make decisions and are able to talk about how they're made and the data that inform them is key to public confidence. But no one ever takes eye off the ball in this regard. At every level, we're there to answer questions and to help provide the insights that people need for the questions they quite rightly are asking. So I hope that helps to provide assurance that access is one thing, but we need the public confidence for that public health gain that we know will come.
Thank you, June.
Well, thank you for that, June. Apologies again for my web connection. David, do you want to take us to the next question, please?
Yes, I just wanted to check. We are covering the whole of June's report here, are we?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, so first of all, congratulations. Wonderful work on the vaccines. I had two questions. One was about, well, they're both around patient safety. The first one was on item 16, where you talk about the work on drugs in pregnancy for epilepsy and the drug safety update. And I find the drug safety update incredibly helpful. But I worry that not many doctors or other healthcare professionals either know about the drug safety updates or are signed up to them. And I wondered what work is done to ensure that that information gets out really widely to the healthcare service. That's the first question.
Really important aspect of our ability to manage risk and manage risk better as new evidence emerges. We're well aware, and we monitor the uptake of drug safety update, that there are some healthcare professional areas, and let's fully acknowledge the busy lives that medical practitioners and pharmacists, nursing staff have, that they find patchy uptake. We hope that through some of our outreach, we have local safety officers, medicine safety officers, that they can be, if you like, vehicles and translate those messages as needed. We also cascade through the learned societies Royal Colleges, Association of British Neurologists, etc. But I think key to what you're exploring there, David, is repeating messages and making messages consistent through various layers of information. And it does include members of our staff going to appearing at conferences to talk things through, and to particularly use our Commission on Human Medicines outreach to make sure that we are keeping those messages flowing. So it's a process of iteration. But I do think that when we come back, as the board has asked to how well we influence healthcare professionals and how well we reach them to influence their practice, then that is a subject we'll need to come back to.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. The second question.
Sorry, David. Can I just build on that point just for a moment? Because I think the other aspect, June, I completely agree about the repeated messaging, because I think that's really, really important. But I think we need to have some sort of systematic way of reviewing how well that's landed. So whether that's some sort of research or some sort of feedback loop, I don't know what it looks like. But I think, you know, in my time in industry, you know, if you were promoting a series of messages, you would do research to back up, were those messages being received, were they being understood, and were they being acted upon? And I don't quite know what that looks like, but I think just giving out the written messages on its own is not enough. I think there needs to be some feedback loop of some sort, and that's maybe something we could take back to the team.
Yes, our Valparate stakeholder network periodically looks at outcomes in terms of how often and the proportion of women who are having an annual review, which is what we're asking for. And of course, we'll be monitoring really closely, including through CPRD, Clinical Practice Research Data Link, switching, and particularly the initiation at different age groups of women in terms of the safer products. So there's a long-standing, if you like, network, but we need, as you say, to follow this through. Some of these changes, as we'll discuss later on, will be monitored really for the foreseeable future. But happy to come back to the comms element, because it's vitally important.
Yeah, I think Stephen's right though. I doubt it lands well with medics, and you know, clearly they are the prescribers often in primary care and secondary care. So I think it is important. And my second point was a shorter one really. I mean, isotretinoin can be a wonderful life transforming drug. I know my son had terrible acne and it was, you know, wonderful. I doubt though he'll respond to any request for information from the public, and that when you do launch a study, you'll hear about the harms. And of course, there are terrible harms. We're aware of that. But my question is, any request for views will tend to focus on the harms. How will you get a balanced view of isotretinoin, which includes the benefits? Because I don't think those people will respond.
That's really important, and it has been factored into our request for contributions. So that goes to a range of stakeholders, patients obviously first and foremost for their experiences, but also the healthcare professionals and academia and industry and so forth. And there really has been an important focus on all kinds of experience. I believe that already we're hearing contrasting views, and experiences like your son's of a good benefit are coming in as well. And the challenge is going to be that benefit risk trade-off, and how information can inform decisions by people, young people who are making quite a big decision. I do hope that there'll be a report that is really clear about how those different and contrasting views have been taken into account. And if there are research areas, including if only we could pick, if someone has a predisposition, genetic predisposition to a harmful outcome, that we could actually remove them from that possible harm. So it's a very interesting exercise, and I really do feel that we will have a wide range of perspectives to factor in at those final public, there will be a public meeting. Thank you.
Okay, how about Mandy? What's your question?
Thanks, Stephen. my question was about the vaccine, and again, brilliant work in getting that approved. My parents are actually having it today. We've got emergency use approval for the vaccine, and that requires NIPSCI to pass each batch. I just wanted to understand the impact that was having on the agency and what it would take to then work towards a full approval.
Well, thank you. Perhaps I can perhaps characterise the decisions a little bit more. Batch approval is what the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control would do for a biological product. So it's part and parcel of our end-to-end approach, from early scientific advice right through to the products that are going out there to where your parents are going to have their jabs, and that's fantastic. So that's, if you like, it's not special. What is special about the emergency use approval is that it enabled us to do things in the shortest time because of the emergency and give the temporary approval for supply. So you've asked a really important and interesting point about translating that to a full authorization. What I would say is that because these are vaccines, the care and the rigor that has been taken over those approvals, I would say is equivalent. And you'll have heard, particularly for the third one, Moderna, that the EU has given a conditional marketing authorization, which of course with our transition from the EU, which we'll talk about later, means that that applies in Northern Ireland. But we have pretty much equivalent standards and information to healthcare professionals. So it shouldn't matter where you're having your jab if the Moderna comes on stream. So we do look ultimately for full authorizations, and that gives everyone the security, we don't need to renew and so forth. But our priority at the moment in the emergency situation is absolutely making those products get to patients with the shortest possible time. So we're looking strategically, now that we've left the transition period, at what the best approach will be, but we will always have the facility to act promptly in an emergency. So if there are more detailed issues, I know our legal colleagues can help with those, but I hope that provides kind of a reassuring picture. We're not taking anything away, it's there, and it will be for as long as it's needed.
No, I sort of understand that. I was also just making sure we had, sufficient capacity with NIPSCI, because this is quite a big ask, because the speed is so great. Yeah,
it certainly is. And on the capacity issue, early steps were taken to consider at full flow, if there are more than 3 vaccines coming through for batch release, that there would be trained and equipped staff with the premises and the management team to help those projects flow very smoothly, because it's a big project management exercise. So at the moment, everything's fine, but we keep a daily watch on it.
Yeah. Just on that point, Christine, is there anything else that you want to add just from the impact on our staff and how they're coping with the demands that are placed on them?
Thanks, Stephen. Well, indeed, just to build on what June said, the batch release, the individual batch release for each and every batch is like it would be for any other product. So we knew that these would be coming, and we did prepare. So as June said, of course, it is quite a bit of work to do, but we have built up capacity at NIPSC in order to deal with this, and we have very good people who are able to do this. The batch really, the kind of batch specific approval means not just the regular batch testing, but on top, that assessors in the licensing division would look at the quality data of individual batches, and that is what is done in a batch specific approval. So that is rather on the licensing bit than on the NIPSCI bit, because the NIPSCI bit is as usual. But of course, what was challenging was to build up the technology in such a short time. But we managed to do this. Again, NIPSCI is very experienced in this. We've got good scientists who know the methods and have been able to do the tech transfer in a very short turnaround.
Great. Okay, I think that little bit of extra context is helpful. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate that. Okay. Mercy, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, just about the vaccines again. And I know that we've kind of introduced more proactive vigilance on it. And I was just wondering how that's going. So obviously we have the yellow card scheme, but I know there's something specific on the vaccines. But also we were going to introduce more proactive, monitoring really of what was going on. So I wanted to know what feedback was coming back and were those systems really working well?
It's a really vital question, and we're getting our yellow card reports really thick and fast now, which is great, and it shows that public and patients are sharing with us any concerns about a side effect that they think we should know about. And I'll say at this point that having had the vast exposure, the millions of people who've already been vaccinated now, we've got a very good understanding. So I'd like to say up front that there's nothing unusual in what we're seeing. So that's something good to say at the moment. It's really fulfilling what we expected from those very carefully done trials. But you're right, we need to go further, and to bring this into the here and now, it's a real time ambition that we contextualize. We put any trend or signal in the context of our really good data on clinical use. And that's the CPRD that helps us to say whether we could see more than we would expect of a particular issue. And so rapid cycling using clinical record data is really important. But there is another theme too, which is carefully done studies that would have been planned in advance. And I know one of our board members may know more than this than me, but we're partnering with some of the academic groups who will help provide another layer of assurance. So what we're hoping is that in the coming few days, there will be out in the public domain how we're doing this, the strategy, and that will be followed, I hope not long after, with the data itself. But a very carefully thought through plan. Now we're in the delivery of it, but I think overall it's good to know that we're not seeing anything unexpected or unusual. So Chair, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And that's very helpful actually. I think it's very assuring to hear that there's nothing unexpected, and I think that's that gives us great confidence. So, but we've got to be vigilant and we've got to keep monitoring this, and that's why we've put the systems in place to do so. Before my internet dropped out during my introduction, I didn't get the opportunity to say that members of the public who are watching the meeting can actually ask questions. Now, you should have had an invitation to join this meeting, and on that invitation, it should have given you the details of www.sly.do, which is the question software that we'll be using. And members of the public can actually use that software with the event code #MHRA-JAN21 if they want to ask any questions during the meeting. Where there's time, we'll try and allow, try and provide the time to enable those questions to be asked during the meeting. But we've also got a 25-minute section at the end of the session where we'll have an open Q&A session. And so Rachel Bosworth, our Director of Communications, will be the person who will actually, basically look out for those questions, and we'll be able to ask them on your behalf. So can I just check, Rachel, if there are any questions related to June's report specifically, or should we move on to the next item?
Yeah, thank you. There's several questions that have come in already, so thank you very much for everyone who started asking those. There's a couple of questions relating to vaccines that touch on some of the areas that June's covered in her report, so you may want to take those now. The first one was whether there are plans for communicating adverse reactions to COVID-19 vaccines, and June, I know you touched on that. But the second part of that question is whether there are any efforts underway to coordinate this globally to give a better view.
Certainly, this is a very strong area of focus, and we've got well advanced plans in the context of our overall strategy to make ADR data available. And that's what the public would be expecting. But we're hoping in a way to give it that wider context so that it doesn't, if you like, just appear in isolation. So that's well in hand and will be forthcoming. You'll see something in the very near future. In terms of global interactions, yes, I think I mentioned a little bit some of the work we're doing under the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, really to have that to and fro dialogue round issues. Even this morning, I think the WHO, in fact, is looking at a signal from Norway. And these are ways that we always enhance and speed up our understanding when we're looking further afield at what we might learn. So I hope that gives a wider context, but really we're always willing to look at a question if somebody wants to ask something specific. But I think my message is the sharing channels are there, they're alive, and they're being well used.
I think that's helpful. Was there any other relevant questions to this report, or should we pick those up at the Q&A session at the end, Rachel?
There's one more relevant one on data relating to vaccines that you might want to take now, and then others later, perhaps.
Thank you.
This is about the additional data that the agency is requiring on the effectiveness of COVID vaccines, for example, in immunosuppressed people or patients with blood cancers. So whether there is additional data required on people with those conditions.
Certainly, it's a really good question because the trials didn't study the vaccines in those special patients. And certainly we'll be working with the developers and researchers to make sure as soon as we do have data that it will be factored in and shared. So very much an area of focus, as there are a number of further studies expected, including better data for one of the vaccines in older people. So we can update our approvals for supply as and when we have new information. I hope that's reassuring.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you to the people who asked those questions. And thank you, June. I think we can certainly note the comprehensive nature of your report. You know, I think there's a lot of activities going on, and I think you've been very assuring today. So thank you very much for that. What I'd like to do now is to move on to one of the other issues that we've been dealing with now for the last 4 years. But obviously over Christmas, you know, the government agreed the new trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. And so really the question that I'd like to raise now to the board is, how will that new trade and cooperation agreement with the EU impact on the work of the agency and also on the supply of medical products in the UK? So we've got a paper on page 14 of the board pack. And Sam, would you like to just make a few key points? You can assume we've read it, but what are the key points you'd like to pull out for us?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as has been discussed, this is really relating to the transition period, and clearly, as you've said, this is very much an agency-wide activity. Just by way of introduction, actually, I've just realised, sorry, Chair, I just thought I probably ought to introduce myself. So I'm Sam Atkinson, so I'm the interim Chief Quality and Access Officer. So I oversee some of the licensing work, but also inspections, enforcement, and some of the pre-market device work. So hopefully that will give you a bit of a flavour. So I've been involved in some of this transition work, but clearly, as I said a minute ago, it's very much a wider organisational activity. So the end of the transition period has been and gone. Obviously, we've delivered on that, I think, and there's a couple of things that are probably worth noting, including a number of technical IT systems. I think somewhere in the region of 14 over that period, a huge amount of guidance and the like. And I think the key points to mention are that patients have continued to receive uninterrupted supply to products, and additionally industry has continued to do its regulatory business through the transition period, and I think they were two of the key objectives of this work. There are definitely a couple of things which we'll need to return to, and this has definitely fallen out of it. So for example, in a year's time we'll have to come back to Falsified Medicines Directive and how we're going to be managing that. In 2 and 2.5 years' time for medicines and devices respectively, we'll have to come back to both of those because that's when the standstill period will end. So we'll need to be thinking about device regulation, but also things like batch testing. And then after a 4-year period, we'll have to come back to the Northern Ireland Protocol and see how we manage those things. So there are definitely, there's definitely a programme of work going forwards. So in the meantime, we do need to start looking into the future and see how everything will transition through our change strategy. And there are potentially some challenges along the way. So, for example, there is limited access to some of the databases, EU databases, and indeed there's no access to other repositories such as data supporting marketing authorisations for Northern Ireland, safety decisions and vigilance data. So in some respects, we're quite limited in terms of having sight of EU decisions. So the task force that was set up to manage the transition will continue, I guess, for a couple of months, maybe through to April or so, to continue some of the work in terms of information sharing, trying to enhance where there are those challenges, and look to start work on the Northern Ireland Protocol. But broadly speaking, they have delivered on the task they were set. And now I guess it's really moving across to the change strategy, the longer term view, and the activities the organisation will need to really consider. So things like to what extent will industry want to use the reliance routes that are available, for example, when we're looking at devices, the CE mark is going to be replaced with a UK conformity assessment. Again, how attractive is this to industry? International partners are clearly going to be key in the future of the organisation, as are linkages across the health family. And I guess the final point to make is that clearly there are learnings from COVID as well that we obviously want to take forward in terms of how we look as a new organisation. So there's still a lot of work to do, a lot of questions to answer, but I think we're in a really good position, having come through the transition period and having a really strong start with our change strategy. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. So, colleagues, questions. There's a lot of good content there. Bruce, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, a minor query and a question. My minor query is the fact that into all our papers are creeping Great Britain and the United Kingdom, which there's one and then the other, and I hope it's going to be acceptable in general if we just talk about the UK and we all understand that there are wrinkles to that. My question about this is on page 5. I'm just concerned about two issues. The last one about the market authorization holders who are in the UK now not having the capacity to approach Europe if they are based here. And I wondered if Sam could say something more about that. And also the point just above that, which I wasn't quite clear from the text, about the risk of companies who don't want this complexity. And I'm not sure whether that was referring to getting products into the Northern Ireland and the UK, or getting into the EU and then the UK. So I wondered if Sam could say a little more about those potential problems.
Could you just flag which paragraphs you're referring to? Sorry.
We're in paragraph 5, the bottom of paragraph 5, the ultimate point, the last point about market authorization holders, and the point just above that about the risk of companies not wanting unavoidable complexity, which didn't quite make sense in the text.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just to comment on your first point about GB and Northern Ireland, I mean, we are having to distinguish between the two because there are going to be different approaches and different marketing authorization routes. So there is a need to do that, unfortunately. So while it might be frustrating to see it in the text, I think we will need to do that. In terms of the other point, let me just reread the bit. Yeah, I think this again comes down to the routes that are available, because obviously for a European marketing authorization, then that will apply automatically to Northern Ireland, and then there's the potential of unfettered access through to GB, and then we also need to consider how we get the same products in GB, which will require a GB MA, for example, or a reliance route. So there are complexities which then therefore sort of go back onto industry because of that, depending on the various different approaches and which approach they want to take. I mean, I mentioned earlier about the reliance route and the question over whether or not that is going to be something that is attractive and how attractive that will be. These are all things we need to work through with industry.
I think this is going to be an active conversation for some time, Bruce, in truth, and certainly over the next sort of month or so. You know, there's June and I have got bilateral meetings with other senior colleagues with each of the major trade associations. We did the Farms PAGB last week, and we've got others planned. Industry would always want things to be simple. And unfortunately, you know, the EU and cooperation agreement is not completely straightforward because of Northern Ireland and the importance of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And so we are going to have a different regulatory approach in Great Britain than we are in Northern Ireland. And sadly, as Sam says, that is the reality. We're going to have to work with industry to try and make that as understandable and as straightforward as we can within the statute that's been set. So I think it's going to be work in progress, but, you know, I think the point is it is going to be more complex than it was, and there's no way of getting away from that. So that will be my perspective. But I think we'll report back when we've got further feedback from the from industry of what their real perspectives are once they've started working with the system, if that's okay. Okay, David, would you like to pick up a question?
Okay, well, so I hope you can hear me because I gather I'm a bit quiet at the moment, but I'll try not to be. So I do think the progress made so far, it has been very good, very impressive. I have a question and a comment. I suppose the comment is, obviously, it's disappointing that we didn't agree with Europe, or Europe didn't agree with us, that we should share pharmacovigilance databases. Of course, they have a population of around 450 million to our 60 million, so I guess we are the bigger losers in that. And my question goes back to Bruce's point about GB versus UK. Were the EU to decide to withdraw a drug for safety reasons, presumably that would affect Northern Ireland, but wouldn't affect the rest of the UK. And I wonder how much information we would have about why that was happening at the time of it happening, so that we could protect the rest of the UK. I couldn't hear that.
Stephen, you were breaking up a little. Have we lost Stephen again? Okay. Shall I attempt just to give a little bit of an answer, and I'm sure June may want to also come into that. So I think, again, David, thanks for the question. I think it really depends on the route as much as anything else. But take, for example, a Reliance route into GB. Yes, you're right. If a product was taken off the market, then obviously it would impact Northern Ireland. But if through a Reliance route, I think we would then have to probably do the same. But certainly the data that we have access to may be limited. But I think all of these things are still being worked through, to be honest. I mean, June, I don't know if you've got any further to add to that.
Correct. Thank you, David, to look at this as an area of concern, because it's quite true that we will be less able to see decisions coming through the EU system as they're being prepared. But I think there are data sources that are available, and actually we do get sight of eudravigilance data and WHO data, and we have links with FDA and of course our work with the Access, Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore. Again, there's a large area of exposure to medicines where signals, and it's what we're agreeing with Access, just in fact talking about this week, where signals will come through. It's about re-gearing our system to work in different ways. And I hope the board can be somewhat confident, because the systems that Europe uses are modelled on ours, and that many of the signals that go through the European route have been generated by our data. And I think it's important to understand that, particularly learnings from COVID, is that there's real openness. We may need to create new umbrellas, and that's where the International Coalition of Regulators is very helpful. But that willingness to act in the best interest of patient safety is there. So a re-gearing and a if you like, orientation, but it's right to be careful and to focus here, because we know that when it comes to a safety issue, every day can count. So we need to be ready with our real-time analytics and to show that in whatever forum we're thinking about prompt action.
So, Steve, we didn't hear your comments.
It was asking June to sort of basically say what you just said, I think, because I think the good thing is, on the face of it, you know, we've actually got more access to data and more opportunities than it maybe looks like from the outside. And so actually, I think from the detailed work that's been done and the links that we've got informally and formally, you know, will give us an assured route of safety data. So I feel very confident about that. So that wasn't the main point. Thank you, David. Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam, for your paper. It's really building on data sharing. As chair of the audit committee, we routinely look at the agency's performance in identifying regulatory fraud and tackling it. And I think we have, as an agency, a good track record in this particular area. So it comes back to this issue about data sharing. Are we in a more disadvantaged situation now in terms of our ability to tackle regulatory fraud in the medicines industry, or is it that we will still be able to get information, as June said, from various signals? And I'm just interested from the perspective as chair of the audit committee.
Okay, Sam.
Thanks. Perhaps I can comment, and again, maybe June wants to comment as well. But I mean, from my perspective, I think, as June has been saying, it's just going to be different routes. We will have access to certain things, and we'll have limited access to other things, if that makes sense. So it's still being worked through. That's one of the reasons why the task force remains, is to continue to work on data sharing activities and arrangements with others. So I think there will still be ability for us to see that and consider it. But June, maybe I can pass over to you, and perhaps you'll have other comments.
Well, similarly, it is an international concern, as the board reflected recently. And just for your information, I raised it with our Australia, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore axis yesterday. It's just one of those things that we constantly keep in view. But as Sam is saying, we'll need to look at, you know, slightly different fora to make sure we get the signals at the right time. But I hope, again, this is a chance to assure that we're on the case. And it may be that we're not using Europol, but we'll be using other sources internationally. It is an international concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Mandy.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so first of all, I think a superb effort again by the agency, particularly getting all the systems up and running for the 1st of January, which was, I know, an area that we'd discussed quite a lot in previous meetings. My main question was really building on what Michael was saying about, as we get a little bit more experience of working in this new way, how can we articulate the risks, again, maybe for ARAC and the board, but much more in terms of medicine safety and patient safety and supply. I think there are some short-term things that we're looking at, like the access to data, which I think you've given some reassurance on, but there are other things coming down the track, particularly from Falsified Medicines Directive, which could affect supply of medicines into the UK, but also the effect of the other routes and whether companies decide not to launch medicines in the UK. So it's really keeping an eye on those risks, but trying to articulate them in terms of patient safety and medicine supply. I don't know whether that's something that's been thought about by the exec.
Shall I come in first? Okay. So thanks very much for that, Mandy. So just, I guess, just in terms of the risks around things like supply, I mean, there's an awful lot of work already been ongoing, as we've heard, around the innovative licensing process and the like, to try and expedite that that whole process, the authorization process. And by doing that, we're trying to make the UK a very attractive place to come to for innovative products. So that, I mean, that's the starting point. That was part of that work was really to be looking forward, saying we want to ensure that the UK is still an attractive place to do business. We also still have really strong relationships across the international piece, as June has been highlighting, and especially with those that supply the UK. So the likes of India, for example, we have very strong relationships with them, and that will help to support the ongoing supply to the UK. So I think there's foundations there which are already going to put us in a really good position. And yes, of course, there's going to be risks, and how we deal with FMD going forwards is absolutely something we need to consider. But of course, that is another thing that's still under discussion. And obviously, we'll work very closely with all our partners and with industry to make sure we mitigate those risks. I'll pause there. I can see June possibly wants to say something as well, but maybe on the safety side. But
from what Sam has said, I think our regular meetings, as Chairman has said, Stephen has said, with trades associations, to keep a finger on the pulse of industry, strategy, industry. You know, the access issue has been really the running theme for the whole of the work we've done in this space. And interestingly, we've seen a boom in national authorisations. So certainly to support industry covering the bases, so that their passage through the rather complicated areas is as simple and speedy as possible. And it's why we're keeping our task force up and running for a while, as long as it takes, to make sure that we're looking ahead all the time to any blips in supply. And we've already mentioned about safety. So probably we'll talk about how we're monitoring performance later on today, but I think there's a key area where that intelligence and looking at the pipeline is going to be really key.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it strikes me that there's a number of things where, you know, there's still some work in progress. We've got to work through some of the practical implications. And I wonder if it's worth having the board having an update, say in March, in terms of how these are working through. I don't think it's something we can necessarily do on a week-by-week basis as a board, but it just strikes me that I think potentially March would be a good time just to review where we're at. We'll have had industry meetings at that stage, and that might be a helpful suggestion. So, Natalie, could we maybe just take an action to review progress on a multitude of these areas for March? Barbara, I think you were going to ask a question.
Yes, I was going to ask a question connected or interconnected with our actually very good and long-standing vigilance systems, which do give us early and quite complete information about adverse reactions, particularly because we have the very large CPRD anonymous GP data as well, which we can interrogate. Do you think that pharmaceutical companies value this, and is there a payoff between them using the UK and getting very good and early helpful adverse events data?
Well, that's a very broad question. Again, June, do you want to kick us off with a response to that? Just thinking of the broader perspective around CPRD and again data.
Certainly, this is a really good time to look at how we've focused largely up now on yellow card, but using increasingly CPRD to give us a breadth of understanding of medicines usage. But could it do more in terms of signals? And working, I know, as the head of CPRD does with other bodies like Health Data Research UK. So I think the question Barbara has asked really puts the light on what is a really important and interesting area. CPRD is, I think, well over 25% of GPs contributing, and it's the longevity of the data that makes it so unique. That picture of health in the UK that makes it such a unique resource, both for industry and for regulators and scientists. So I think, yes, let's come back at some suitable point to look at how the way that we conduct safety surveillance could benefit from even greater use of clinical data, clinical record data.
Thank you, June. Barbara, did you want to come back on that? You were waving your hand again or not? Sorry, you're on mute.
That's it. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah, yes, please. I wanted to extend that thought to our future work developing our medical devices services, because of course, in many cases, surgeons don't have long-term contact with people in whom they implant devices, whereas GPs do, and they see the longer-term patient outcomes. I wondered if you'd been thinking about that too.
June?
We have done some pilot work on device studies with CPRD, and I think what will be the big benefit is what comes through with the bill, the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill, so that we can have unique identifier data and also link, you know, as we start to use data better with hospital records. There is already an interesting, you know, work in the medical devices division, linking in with MD Epinet, which is a wider network of epidemiological studies built on registry data, of which the UK has excellent registry data in pockets. So watch this space. When we have the bill and we can move on from there, I think all the data sources that can be linked up to help us understand the long-term safety of devices, we really will achieve an ambition for our devices colleagues that way.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just bring Professor Liam Smeeth into the discussion? You know, Liam, you're obviously an avid user of CPRD. You know, just from your practical experience, you know, how could you see things developing?
I mean, it's very interesting because the CPRD is of such huge value globally. It's been used time and again, particularly actually by things like the European Medicines Agency, the FDA, and multiple pharmaceutical companies. And one of the features for me as an academic involved in drug studies is how little impact, you know, Brexit is having on that. The value of CPRD and the other data sources, registries and things that June's talked about to regulators around the world, to the pharmaceutical companies around the world, and the interest in the UK data, particularly CPRD, from academic groups around the world has not been touched. And that value will remain, and in fact probably grow, because, you know, over the decades, the NHS is sort of resolutely remaining, having full population coverage, giving us this unique resource almost in terms of data internationally that is increasingly recognised as being of such value. So I'm not saying it's Brexit proof, but the good will out, and I think its use will only continue and will grow, in fact, by regulators and companies around the world, in fact, including in Europe.
Yeah. And I think we could probably pick this up in terms of the workshop we talked about in the actions, in terms of CPRD and its future. You know, it is a very strong role in safety monitoring here, and also how we expand the data sources. I think that's the other component to beyond just GP records. I think so. I think that if we do that workshop before March, as we said in the action list, I think that actually joins these things together quite nicely. But that's a very helpful intervention there, Barbara. Okay, I think on that particular point, I think if there are any questions on this, Rachel, we'll take them in the Q&A session at the end. I'm probably quite keen to maintain our sort of momentum through the agenda. And we've been talking about data quite a lot. And actually the other key area that we want to talk about today is the plans to introduce a new registration system to improve the oversight of medical devices in the UK. Now, this has been a sort of team effort from Devices Division colleagues, John Quinn, our Chief Technology Officer, and also Professor Bruce Campbell, one of our non-executive directors. So, Bruce, do you want to kick us off with an introduction to this paper, and then we'll pick up questions beyond that?
Indeed, thank you. Well, this paper is about a new device registration system that the MHRA is planning to improve the oversight of medical devices in the UK. And the stimulus for this is threefold. First, Brexit, leaving the EU system. Second, the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review, Do No Harm, which recommended an overhaul and improvement of the system for device regulation. And third, a long-standing awareness that the current system is not ideal. Now, a word about the genesis of this paper, because it deals with a highly complex area and indeed with a moving target. its scope is potentially huge with enormous capacity for muddle. And I was highly critical of the initial draft I was shown. The authors have asked me to tell you that, because what you now see is the result of a process of repeated scrutiny. And even now, it describes a work in development. By brief way of background, medical devices come in 3 classes. Class 1, low risk, bandages, thermometers and the like. Class 2, medium risk, like syringes. And Class 3, the high risk ones, joint implants and cardiac pacemakers. And incredibly, at present, the MHRA does not know automatically about all Class 2 and 3 devices, the high risk ones, that are in use in the UK, because manufacturers can go to any country in the EU to obtain a CE mark for their device, and they can then sell it anywhere. So the MHRA may not or may not have been aware in the past of high-risk devices on the UK market, finding out about them only when it receives an adverse incident report. A European-wide database for devices called EUDAMED has been in development for years, but it's not yet fully operational. And until recently, there was no good way of identifying any particular device. And a very important development, which June's already mentioned, which will underpin the new registration system, is the introduction of unique device identifiers, UDIs, for all medical devices. And it's important to understand the UDI consists of 2 parts: the device identifier, which specifies the precise type and model of the device, and the product identifier, which includes the details of the lot number and date of manufacturer, etc. And UDIs are on device package or their packaging as barcodes and in a readable format. Now, the new MHRA registration system will use these device identifiers as a pivotal part of the information it will eventually record for each and every device being used in the UK. The new system requires manufacturers of all classes of medical devices to register them as being on the UK market or entering the UK market. And they'll be asked for a range of information about each device, including the UDI. And the UDI will gradually become a legal requirement within this registration database. Now, the design and development of the IT for all this is beyond my expertise, and John Quinn will say a brief word about that in a moment. But what I'd like to point out is the important range of benefits that this system is designed to give. First, it will mean that the MHRA will, for the first time, be able to hold information on all devices in a single system, with devices unambiguously identifiable and easily linked to safety reports about them. And that will greatly facilitate device surveillance, recognition of safety signals, and the ability to take early action when necessary for patient safety. It'll also aid the recognition of counterfeit devices and devices that are not legally on the UK market. Now, second, the registration UDI database will be a readily accessible source of information for patients, for the public, for healthcare professionals and healthcare organizations. And it will, for example, enable a patient to look up any restrictions related to a device they have implanted, for example, whether they can go in an MR scanner. And third, and finally, there will be very important linkages and liaisons, in particular with NHS Digital. NHS Digital has a new medical device information system, which differs from the MHRA, is that the NHS Digital system will contain information about the devices implanted into individual patients derived from hospital records. The MHRA system will inform the NHS Digital system about the characteristics of specific devices, while the NHS Digital system will supply information, nothing about individual patients, but collated information to the MHRA to assist in device safety surveillance. Another important liaison is with NHSX. Now, NHSX is the organisation set up to coordinate and leverage information from across the whole healthcare environment, all the different information systems, both national and local, to obtain its maximum value. And the MHRA is engaging with NHSX's medical device safety program to agree and develop the best ways of sharing and benefiting from the new MHRA system in combination with all the other capacity that NHSX will have. And finally, before I finish, two other important relationships to mention. And that is, there are a number, as June has said, of well-established procedure registries in the UK held by professional medical societies. The National Joint Registry is the best known one. And these collect variable amounts of information about implanted devices. Now, the MHRA registration system will provide these registries with additional information that will help them to identify devices that seem to be performing less well than others, and will enable them to share these findings with an eye to long-term patient safety. And finally, the devolved administrations are developing their own systems for using medical device UDIs, and the MHRA registration system will enable them to derive detailed information about those specific devices. So that is the overall intention and plan, and John Quinn is going to comment very briefly on IT aspects which are beyond my ken.
John.
Very much. I mean, firstly, I think it's worth saying thank you to Bruce, and I think it's absolutely worth saying that it's been through a number of iterations and is better for it. So I hope the board and members of the public are able to read that paper and digest what is actually a really complicated environment in a simple way. And I think some of the images in the document are helpful to reflect on. It's also worth saying that the first stage of this has already been delivered through the work we've previously been talking about with one of the systems that we made live on the 1st of January. The feedback's really good. Some of the suppliers now using those services have been very complimentary about how easy they have been to use. So we have a base product, and the key driver for us is to build out from that in order to be able to capture this new data. But it is a complex environment, and I think the trick will be to break it down into smaller improvements as we go, and essentially link the data that we're getting in this space into a wider data, digital and technology strategy. Finally, just to reiterate the points on the benefits are really significant, and if you translate this into what we do next, patient access to the data itself means that we have to consider very carefully about our websites and how people engage in that. The cleaner data makes the regulatory process much better, but the real prize is the safety data that I think this will drive. So I hope you find the paper useful, and a big thanks to Graham Tunbridge as well and his team for bringing the content together on this.
Well, thank you very much. I think this shows the real benefit of a unitary board, actually. I think non-executives and the executives working together to really try and cut through what is a potentially complex area into some very clear recommendations. Because at the end of the day, if the system needs to work, and therefore clarity and simplicity in the end is going to be really important. I'd like to probably bring Greg Chalmers in now. Now, Greg's the Deputy Director for Devices in the Scottish Government. So this is actually probably your area of expertise, Greg. And I just wondered, from what you've read in the paper, if there's any particular aspects of how we can work more closely together, and actually how we can make this work for patients in Scotland as well as the rest of the UK. So, Greg, any observations?
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you to Bruce and everyone in the team there for the paper, which I think is it's very good. It's very clear. I think what it does is set out benefits across the UK very well. I mean, as always, and apologies for sounding like a broken record, I think that's an important dynamic for us, and no doubt for colleagues in Wales and Northern Ireland, because there's a combination of functions here between NHS England and some of the bodies involved there, and our own NHS in Scotland. And I know, for example, that in paragraph 15, there's allusion to the measures that now in the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill, which will apply across the UK, with agreement, I should hasten to add, from the Scottish Parliament, and I think also now the Welsh Senate as well. So we will want to work together to make sure that the work that NHS Digital is doing and NHSX is doing can blend seamlessly and effectively with the work that our own UDI programme has been developing since the autumn of last year. But no, I think our ministers certainly welcome this work, and I think the connection that's been made already to the Cumberledge review is very important. As you said, Stephen, this is a complex area, but it's an area that has created some very unfortunate experiences, more than unfortunate, very bad experiences for patients. And so it's important that we put the time in together to make the improvements, and we are committed to working with you on that. I just one daft laddie question. I hope you don't mind me asking. I'm sorry if this is obvious to others, but I just wanted to ask Bruce or John whether the present plan is for the registers, I beg your pardon, for the systems to apply to products newly registered, or whether all these systems are to apply to all the devices already in the system. And I apologise if that's clear from the paper, but I couldn't find it.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Greg. Bruce, can you answer?
I told John in an email earlier this morning that somebody would ask that, so I'm going to leave him to answer it.
John, over to you. That's the hospital pass, I think.
It was, and I said we may need to take that question away to Bruce, and as I haven't yet got to the answer. I think we'll need to take that away. Certainly, the where I think we will need to start from is
John, you're on mute.
It is dropped off there. I think we will be.
And again.
Keeps dropping out, I do apologise. Okay, we'll be taking the new data. I think we'll need to take this question away and come back on the old data.
Yeah, okay. But absolutely new products, it will be the intention. And I think, I could see a scenario where we need to think about risk proportionality, and higher risk products, that are already on the market potentially. I'm just speaking out loud now. But I think it is worthy of the debate and the discussion of exactly what we put into place here. I think if we could maybe take away that as an action, then please, Natalie, just to review, the status for this new system in terms of is this, as Greg's question, does it apply to all new products or to existing ones as well? I'll come, Barbara. Is this a related point to this question? Because I'd like to come to one of the other colleagues first, if that's okay. Or
I'm happy to wait.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Mercy, you have been very patient.
Thank you. I think this area is really exciting and great potential. The bit I wanted to ask was that obviously the MHRA is obviously collecting product information, and the really key bit is what the registries, what NHS Digital and the devolved administrations will be doing is collecting the patient data of where this is used. And it's that interaction around surveillance. And I'm not clear who's kind of responsible for that, who's picking up the signals if things are going wrong at an early stage, instead of kind of waiting, as we've had in the past, for things to go wrong with a lot of people before those signals are picked up. And I also wanted to know, again, maybe slightly outside our remit, but certainly in the link to the registries, is this covering private hospitals as well? Who picks up about what's happening in products in kind of private hospitals? Obviously, I'm thinking of implants and devices like that, but in private healthcare as well as the NHS.
Okay.
I might be interested in some of that. The private hospitals, for example, the National Joint Registry and the other registries of implants of which I'm aware, apply equally to private hospitals and the NHS. With regard to who is actually going to have the oversight of all this, I think that's going to be a work in development. And I refer back actually to the conflict of interest the declaration of interest I made at the start of the meeting, which is, ongoing work between the Department of Health, NHSX and the like, because NHSX, as I see it, is going to be the sort of coordinating mechanism for so much of this information, because it is going to have its fingers in each pie. That's what it's for. And so I would see NHSX as being the vehicle. The thing I'm a little uncertain about, which you've raised, is who would actually be the organisation that is responsible for ensuring that the safety signals are acted upon. And my sense is that's the MHRA. I might turn to John.
Yeah. Well, I was going to maybe suggest June, maybe could you pick that up? Because that's very much around safety and our whole interrelationship with NHSX and NHS Digital.
Absolutely. And the Safety Connect system will provide that signalling, because it will look at device adverse incidents as well as harms related to medicines. And it's so important that the connect bit of the name is able to connect with the data set we're talking about now. It's a vital part of what Mercy's asking, is to pick things up promptly and investigate them. And those that are watching the bill progress through Parliament will be aware that there's been an amendment for a new devices expert advisory committee with a statutory footing. Again, gives us a focus for taking those early judgments. So very much in the frame to take forward now.
And I would imagine, Mercy, this will inevitably become a topic of one of your patient safety and engagement committee meetings, because I think any new system always introduces risk, and so it's really important that we get assurance as a board in detail that we're addressing some of these really important issues you've raised. So thank you for that. Mandy, how about you? What's your comment?
Well, thanks, Stephen. I think it's building on some of the ones that have come previously. It's really about the governance of the system, where the roles and responsibilities lie, starting right with the manufacturers. How would a manufacturer apply for a UDI code? Who gives those? And I think that where this is work in progress, but really looking at the end-to-end of how that code is born, if you like, how it's then used, and who's responsible for oversight at each stage, because otherwise the quality, if the data quality isn't maintained throughout both initially and through the life cycle, then it won't be giving us, we won't be able to use it to look at safety signals. So it's really looking at the governance of this whole process, right from the manufacturers, the role the different NHS bodies have, the role healthcare providers have, and where is that going to be developed, and is that through a consortium, and then who then has oversight? Because I think without that, the systems themselves can't just give you the data.
Yeah.
I was thinking about a parallel with things like ATC codes for medicines, about how you apply to those through the World Health Organization. Is there something parallel that we'll be looking for in applying for a medical device code? Because particularly for level 2 and level 3 devices.
Okay, John Quinn, just thinking about the management of data and the governance of the data and the inputs, as Amanda's saying. What thinking's been done on that so far?
I think Bruce was right to refer to NHSX as being a key player in bringing this together. It is going to be a system-wide collaboration and governance. I think that's the key for us. So I think that is not fully known. It'll be a bit like using. So Mandy, I think that's a really good reference point actually about where we could look to for lessons learned. But I think we're still defining it. I think where we started was it's going to be a complicated system and therefore risky. But I think there are really good relationships in place with X and digital as well. So it is there that we'll be looking for this next phase of defining, and governance will be really critical as we go through. But you're absolutely right. Data quality, once the UDI is assigned, will be critical for making the system simple and cheaper to implement.
could I maybe make a suggestion? Yeah, Michael, I know you want to come in as well, but just thinking ARAC's role in terms of looking at risk across the organisation. Is this something that you could pick up as an action, Michael, as an ARAC committee? I know it won't necessarily make the February meeting, but I think there's an important area here of governance around these sort of new registry systems.
Yes, Stephen, very happy to pick on that. My point really builds on what Mandy and you have said. I mean, I think this is brilliant and really 100% supportive of it. But I'm also interested in the governance of the overall implementation of a new system, because this is incredibly complex. There's multiple players: NHSX, NHS Digital, the MHRA, the devolved administration and the Department of Health. So if you're treating this as a system development, who is the equivalent of the senior responsible officer? Does it rest within the MHRA? Is it in the Department of Health? To me, I'm still not sure about I know this was a document for implementation, but what is the timeline from beginning to end that we will begin to see the benefits? Who is monitoring the realisation of that? Is it the MHRA or is it the Department of Health? I really do recommend that we do need to get that governance right. So I go a little bit differently to Mandy. I agree totally about the information governance, but there's something about implementation of a new system like this, which is inherently complex for the reasons that John explained.
Okay, maybe I can just pick up the one question around timescales. John, can you give us some sort of scale of the timescale for the implementation of this program, just as a starting point?
So I think we've got it in the paper. That's the new regulations will come in. I think we've got about 12 months to get in the UDI requirements. Planning for that is underway. What we're doing as a whole is to bring together all of the requirements from the agency, whether that's the work coming out of or the agency's change strategy, plus some of our end-of-life systems. So there's a real balance to be made here. That has to be brought into some planning that we are kicking off right now. Our aim is to have that plan developed by the new financial year, so we are hitting the ground running. The exact definition of it and where those trade-offs are is something that we're yet to do, Stephen. So we're working on them now.
Okay, I think Michael, maybe we can take your questions as an action for your committee to probably review in detail, because I don't think we can probably do that justice today.
No.
And I think it needs the in-depth conversation, and discussion around all the different aspects of governance and risk that a program of this sort brings, not just to the agency, but also to the management of data. So I think it's both. So, as I said, I know that won't happen for the February meeting, but I think maybe for your next meeting, that will probably be quite good timing, because by then that fits in with the end of the financial year. John should have done the prioritisation work. We'll have a more clear idea, I think, at that particular point. So if you're okay with that, I think we maybe ask ARAC, the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, to review the governance of this programme in its broadest sense, if that's okay. But thank you for starting that discussion off, Mandy. Sam, I missed you earlier. I'm sorry, you maybe want to come back on an earlier point, but what's your contribution?
I did indeed. It might strike off an action. So it was in relation to the requirement for products to be registered, and what that is for new products, and indeed products that are already sold onto the UK market. So I just thought I'd provide a bit of clarity on that. So there's effectively a staggered grace period for products to be registered. So it's depending on the risk factor. So high risk products are 4 months, medium 8 months, and low 12 months. So that's for new products. So registration only really applies to those new products coming onto the market. For markets that have already been sold onto, products that have already been sold onto the UK market, then they complied with the regulatory requirements at the time at which they were sold onto the UK market. So there will be a tail of some products that will remain on the market that aren't. So hopefully that provides a bit of clarification.
Well, thank you for that. I think that is genuinely helpful. So I appreciate the input from the team on that one. Barbara, would you like to take the last question? I said I'd come back to you.
Yes, I had a very quick question, which is I'm really impressed by the breadth of input to these medical devices records. Will there be one point of contact for the manufacturer, or will they have to deal separately with the different inputs?
That's a good question. John Quinn, were you able to answer that one?
I was thinking, what a great question that was. I think it's the same answer. There are multiple. It depends on what part of the process you're joining. So to get your UDI, there's a route to get them. The process then, in terms of where we are in terms of registration, will be clear. But as we said, it's a link through the system, which is why I think Michael's question was so good, because what's the end-to-end position and how is it governed? So while there are good relationships and the processes are being mapped, how is that end-to-end system owned and who's accountable? I think we've still got to work that through. It is possible the team have made more progress on that, but we'll need to take that away. I think the answer, Barbara, will come through that work.
Okay.
And what I didn't find in the information that would be kept was whether this was going to be a lifetime dynamic record. There was quite a lot of literature from the USA FDA some time ago about the problem that devices often get tweaked. Manufacturers have to get the component plastics and metals from different sources. They tweak the design of moving parts and things. And the FDA found that some devices were quite different later on than when they were registered. Is there a capacity to record tweaking in this system?
Yeah. John?
So I have to say I've phoned a friend on this one. Yes. So the answer is that UDI changes have to be registered with us through that process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's the nature of devices, isn't it? Because the constant iteration of devices through their life. The end product is very different to the early products quite often. So I think that's a valid point. But I think in terms of just coming back to the first point that Barbara made, in terms of making it easy for industry, just remind the board that one of our strategic objectives is enabling healthcare access. We've got a responsibility to support UK PLC and make it easy for industry to do business in the UK. So we get the benefit, and patients get the benefit of new products. So I think whatever the solution is, John, I'd encourage us to keep that in mind, of keeping it simple, straightforward, and as easy to access for industry as possible, because that's the way patients will benefit from new products. If we make it difficult, patients will not benefit. And I think therefore that we're not fulfilling our strategic aims as an agency. So that's probably how I'd probably sum that one up. Okay, well, I think that's been a really interesting and useful discussion, but I'm quite keen to move on to the fourth main topic of today, which is we've referred to all the way through this meeting, is around patient safety. And the Cumberledge review has been mentioned a number of times today. Obviously, there's been a government statement, last week, but obviously the agency has got a number of short, medium, and long-term deliverables. And June, I wonder if you could just highlight from the paper, some of the key points from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Clearly, we've all been having extensive discussion on the recommendations of the Cumberledge review, which apply to the agency. But as you said, today we're looking at the deliverables. What is it we're going to be putting in place and when? And just looking at the paper, I'm clear that we need to look hard at what short, medium and long term actually means. So I'll just simply highlight one or two aspects, and then we'll be really going back to where does this take us to in the huge change that Cumberledge is seeking to achieve, whereby patients will feel their views are listened to and acted on. Of course, we want a more responsive and safety reporting system, and we want better evidence on which to make safety decisions. But ultimately, this is about including patients in our systems and our activities. So by short term, I think we can look at Q1 this year for the publication of our new patient and public engagement involvement strategy. Importantly, I think for the board is strengthened leadership, accountability and board assurance. And so I'm pleased to say that the recruitment process for our new Chief Safety Officer is well underway. And we want to be talking, in fact, later today about the new Patient Safety and Engagement Committee of the board, which will really make sure that we have lay input on the work of that committee. And the new Chief Safety Officer will be leading on the implementation in practice of the recommendations of the Cumberledge Review. And what we really want it to be is a revitalised approach to vigilance of both medicines and devices. Medium term, I would say we're seeing deliverables coming through Q2, Q3 onwards in terms of the system. Safety Connect, we've mentioned, that will introduce a much more patient-friendly system that hopefully will be the umbrella for a more responsive system, not just patients using it, but feeling that their engagement with what we do flows from that. And we've already talked about the drive for better evidence, the registries, NHSX, NH Digital on the MESH registry, for example, and you know, the work on the UDI master data, so that we can start to understand safety in practice of these implantable products. Part of the announcement that Chairman has mentioned was the publication of a report on optimising data on medicines used in pregnancy, and that's got to be a constant theme. Our partnering work with the FDA and the EMA has really exposed a big gap in regulation, and we need to close that gap with better evidence on medicines as a matter of course, rather than by exception. And we all know how much interest there has been with the COVID-19 vaccines, and can they or can't they be used in pregnancy? Do they affect fertility? Really important questions. I think as part of that second phase, the medium term, we will be wanting to repeat our survey to see whether we are actually impacting on patients' views on how well they're listened to and whether views have been acted on. And that will inform the longer term deliverables, which I would say will start coming in from actually 1 to 2 years. Once we have the new powers in the bill, that we can start to be looking at, as mentioned, the new safety committee, for the new expert advisory committee for devices that will be a focus for safety issues, patients involved in regulatory decision making. And at each phase of all of this, we'll be monitoring, in particular, the usage of valproate, both in mental health conditions and in epilepsy, to see that it's being driven to the irreducible minimum. So I think finally the point is that these short, medium and long term aren't sequential. They're all starting, but it's when the deliverables will actually come into being, and they'll deliver at different times. We want to deliver in the shortest time. I think the big questions for us to look at is this plan going to deliver in the shortest time, but really make change happen, the change that we want to see. So that's just a brief overview, and really happy to explore more of the detail there. And in particular, if the board says, well, there's some things missing there, then now is the time to plug them in. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, June. Well, thank you for that. You know, this has been a journey actually, and I think what I've seen on each iteration of our thinking and our planning is getting more specific. And I'm really pleased we've got some very, very clear deliverables now. So I think this is, you know, this is really good stuff from my perspective. So thank you for your efforts on this. Mercy is obviously the chair of the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. Do you want to just kick us off with this topic?
Yeah, I've got a few specific comments and suggestions. On 24 with the Safer Medicines in Pregnancy and Breastfeeding Consortium, talking about working with NICE, they're updating their advice at the moment on shared decision making. And it might be really good if, I don't know if you've missed the deadline, but certainly input from that consortium to NICE to look at about how clinicians share information and encouraging that. I think they have a number of tools as well that might be quite useful to people. So that's just a suggestion. I just need a bit of reassurance really about, obviously I'm really kind of welcoming the idea that the agency is looking at patient involvement from end to end of all it does and all its processes. Just thinking about the diversity of that patient representation and keeping that on the agenda, and the need for training, support and debriefing of all lay people, as well as patient reps involved in particular bits of work. I know we do bits of that, but I kind of want assurance that it's going to be kind of systematic, a way of doing that kind of training, support and debriefing. And just a little bit on the clinical trials unit, looking at trials and how research is put together, just recommending the James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnership and working with them, just to give the trials unit some support in some of that.
Okay, thank you, Mercy. There's a few points there, June. Is there any you want to respond to?
A really helpful selection of steers there. I think the shared decision-making tool that NICE are developing has been discussed periodically in the consortium. That consortium really started because of women saying we're getting different advice from different organisations, whether it's BUMPS or it's the MHRA or it's the leaflet. And we've understood how important it is that once we're upgrading to more consistent information based on evidence, that shared decision-making approaches are there to help. I think there's a lot to learn from the way NICE even uses words, rather than saying you will be getting something, then you may be offered. And I think there's ways that NICE approach, in both ways of the word, can feed into how we produce leaflets for women. And as I say, the work of the consortium is bedding in, but the strategy that it will take forward is all to play for, and NICE is going to be very key to that. On the question of bringing in a really diverse perspective to our patient facing inclusion, I think that's something to really work on. I think our new strategy will include a fair bit on that. And interestingly, we've learned a lot during COVID of the different perspectives and what different diverse backgrounds bring to a discussion. So doing it systematically is the challenge, and I'm going to lay the challenge to Rachel Bosworth as she brings forward that new strategy. And finally, the clinical trials unit have been doing a lot on patient-reported outcome measures, but we'd like to see that, again, more systematically used. It's not just a case of saying, has the trial included that? It's actually, how have you factored that into measuring what matters for a patient? And so often we call it surrogate measures, but they are often not what a patient will think are beneficial and valuable. So right across the piece, I can see a really important role, Mercy, for the committee you're chairing, because it will keep our minds on what matters.
Yeah, I think these detailed points are exactly the sort of issues that we should be discussing at the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, so to make sure then the board can be given detailed assurance, these measures are in place. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, David. What's your perspective?
Yeah, it's slightly overlapping actually. I was going to ask about patient-reported outcome measures, and to the extent to which industry use them at the moment. How MHRA feels they should be used in the future, and what interaction there is between MHRA and industry on their use.
Plenty of discussion, but I have a sense, possibly I don't have the evidence to back it at my fingertips, that not used as much as they could be. We've partnered with Birmingham University, which has a unit led by Professor Melanie Calvert, doing some really quite groundbreaking work. And the opportunity of our regulatory science strategy is to drive that further. But again, when we talk like this, the first question in our minds is, has that been developed with patient input? And so often, as I say, the measures that we have in place don't reflect what a patient will look for in terms of benefit from their medicine. So I think, again, the word is systematic. There's been a lot of very interesting development in this area, but to systematically use patient-reported outcomes in trials is a clear goal. And I know Christian is overseeing our regulatory science strategy. Stephen might want to say a word about where this will fit.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to bring Christian in actually on that very point actually. So, this is very much back to how we're looking at trials in the future, Christian, as well. So, what's your perspective around this issue?
Thanks. And sorry to the audience, I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Interim Chief Scientific Officer at MHRA, and I'm in charge of the innovation portfolio, and that includes also the research and the development part and the agency regulatory science strategy. So the board at the last meeting saw the key topics for science, and indeed patient-reported outcomes is a key component to this. And I would want to discuss with colleagues as well how we can best involve patients at the right time. So we're currently writing up the first draft strategy. We're heading as well for some external activities on kind of cooperating with our academic stakeholders, our regulatory science strategy. And then when it's more mature, I think it would be good to have patients' views as well. Because indeed, I remember cases where a patient-reported outcome actually made a very abstract efficacy outcome actually much more tangible for everyone, including regulators, not patients only who then understand what the trial is about, but also for regulators. So this was a real important learning for me, and this is why I think the MHRA should be at the forefront of actually actively involving patients and putting patient-reported outcomes. It's not undisputed patient-reported outcomes in the scientific community because there is a certain subjectivity to it, but you can control for this, and still it is a very valid outcome. And indeed, it is for the patients that we are regulating. So to cut a long story short, indeed, that should be a major part of the strategy. Thanks.
Yeah. And as we go through the life cycle, I'm just wondering, Sam, whether there's anything you want to add in terms of, where patient involvement in licensing processes, whether, in terms of, I know we're starting to think about new regulatory frameworks. It's at an early stage, I know, at this moment, but have you got any thoughts of how we could involve patients more systematically?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. It's interesting you should ask that because the ILAP, the new innovative licensing process, in fact, has a part of the engagement with the industry is actually to have a specific section on patient engagement and the use of patient-reported outcome measures. This is actually being built into the target development profile. So, I think there are lots of opportunities. Have we done it all yet? No, I think we can do certainly a lot more. But certainly the direction of travel is that this is absolutely the future way we'll be engaging with industry, and the expectations we'll be setting as well, in order that the patient voice can be used and really taken into consideration in terms of decision making throughout the process. So yes, it's very high on the agenda, Chair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sam. So, David, I hope that gives you some assurance. I would hope. Yeah. Okay. Michael, do you want to follow up with another question?
Yes, please. Just a very quick, it's just an observation really, and hopefully some positive advice. There's a lot in here, really, really good, and it relates to something that June said. You can imagine a situation in 12 months, 18 months time, one of the parliamentary select committee, particularly the Health Select Committee, will follow up what we have done in relation to Cambridge and more widely across the Department of Health. So I think what we've got here is a series of clear actions and our commitment to taking those actions. But I think it's also important that we're in a position whenever Parliament holds us to account to demonstrate what outcome this had. And it relates to the point that June said earlier about getting independent information from patients that these actions have made a difference. And so it's really almost now thinking about the evaluative framework that we are putting in place to demonstrate that we are making a difference in response to Cambridge, and that we're prepared to report that and be as transparent about that as possible.
Is there a quick response to that, June?
Certainly. Not only will there be scrutiny at the level of the Health Select Committee, I'm sure, but there's an all-party parliamentary group called First Do No Harm, and we're expecting absolutely to be held to account. But your point that we need to be evaluating through surveys and through other outcome measures that actually such harms have been, those in the frame of Cambridge have been minimised effectively, but that other harms are quickly detected and that patients, truly sense the system is working for them rather than they're a bystander.
Yeah, I think there's a useful point there, isn't there? Because actually, I think as we've been working on this journey, we've got to a point of some key deliverables. I think what Michael's now saying, what are the outcome measures for these deliverables? I think obviously we'll look for some of that. Okay, Liam, you want to come in. I will come back to you, Mandy. I know you've been waiting patiently, but Liam, you came in during the middle of that conversation. Do you want to add anything?
It was really only about the response as a whole. I thought it was really positive, and I really liked the use of specific examples. Like, here's how we're going to do things differently now, and actually do them and show that it's responsive, and it's responsive to the requests and recommendations. And I really like, rather than sort of saying we're going to be better at public involvement, actually saying we're going to do this on this drug and we're going to do it this way, and actually demonstrating it straight away. I think it's great use of examples. I really liked it.
Okay, that's great. Mandy.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, I think it's sort of reinforcing a couple of points that's already been made, but particularly with ILAP, I think the opportunity there to get both patient engagement, but also thinking about pregnancy and women there who are typically underrepresented in clinical trials, to make that much more of a requirement will actually help to build in patient engagement into our processes as well as surveying. So I think maybe when we have the ILAP review at board, we can just think about how that is happening.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, there's a benefit for industry here, and if they can get their drugs to market more quickly, and they can generate in that time patient data, patient-reported outcome data, then that's in some ways for them a small price to pay in terms of working that through, and we can't do all of this on our own. So I just really think about how we broaden clinical trials, and I think COVID's taught us a lot, whether it's ethnic minorities, it's pregnant women, it's other things. And I think as a regulator, we have to maybe nudge that along a bit, because the industry will typically want to get the best success. So the entry criteria for clinical trials might not be as broad as we would want. Okay. So I think it's maybe just thinking that and how we can get others engaged in this to give us the data we require.
I think this is where internationally with FDA and EMA we can make a difference. And there's a paper coming out shortly from a workshop we held with the other regulators in January in London, in 10SC in fact, because everybody's recognising now that if a drug or a vaccine is going to be used in pregnancy, we should have data. Simple as that. So let's create that climate and develop the evidence that will make decisions for women and their healthcare providers much easier.
Okay. I think that's been a very helpful discussion again. Can I just ask, is the board content to endorse the short, medium and long-term deliverables that have been proposed? I'm seeing lots of nodding heads and thumbs up. Yes. So thank you very much for that. So I think, Natalie, we can just record that the board does endorse these deliverables. And I think then the only other follow-up action is then just to be thinking about how we maybe measure the, how well they're being delivered over time. I think that's probably the key point, just to complete the loop on this. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you very much for that. This brings us on to the last topic, which is the final proposed terms of reference for our 3 new board assurance committees. Now, this is obviously something we've been systematically working through. We started off with the paper in October, talking about the creation or establishment of 3 new board assurance committees. We agreed their membership in November. We talked about the draft terms of reference in December, and now we've been asked to approve the final proposed terms of reference. So none of this is new to anybody, so I think we should be able to do this relatively easily. But first of all, can I just ask on the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, that's pages 37 to 39, are there any particular comments or questions? I'm seeing no hands, so can I ask that we approve the terms of reference for the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee? Thumbs up will do. Perfect. Okay, so that's approved. The Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, this is obviously one of the key deliverables from the paper we've just been discussing, in fact. So again, we deliberately changed the name to Patient Safety and Engagement. That was a very conscious decision. I think it's a very helpful change as well, because it really starts to focus the purpose of the committee very clearly. Again, can I just ask if there are any final questions or comments on the proposed terms? Seeing no hands. Can I ask the board to put a thumbs up to approve them? Perfect. Okay, they're approved as well, Natalie. So the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee, another new board assurance committee, but one that's, again, really important as the organisation goes through a massive amount of organisational change. We want to ensure that we are able to develop our people, we look after our people, as June mentioned in her early Chief Executive's report. So again, can I just ask if there are any questions on the proposed terms of reference? No. Can I ask if we can have a thumbs up for approval, please? Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm pleased to say that all three sets of terms of reference for the new board assurance committees have been approved. I know that meetings are being set up so that we can then start to implement them. My intention is very much is that each assurance committee chair will be able to give an assurance report to the board on a regular basis, and what I'd like to do work with Natalie is to try and get a board schedule of business so that we can then work our way through, to make sure we're systematically working through all of these key areas, both in terms of financials and risk, around patient safety and patient engagement, and around organisational development and appropriate reward and development of staff. So I think systematically we can put a board programme that's going to cover all those fundamental issues that are vital for the work of the agency. So that brings us to a close on the actions on the agenda. Because I got rudely interrupted by my internet connection, and I do apologise, I've been with my intermittent internet connection today. It's never happened before, but it certainly happened today, unfortunately. The one thing I was going to say in my introductions was just a comment about Alistair Hardesty. Al is head of MHRA sponsorship at the Department of Health, and it's actually going to be his last meeting because he's going to be moving to another role within the Department of Health. So Al, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your support, your encouragement and your advice, and to wish you very well in your new role. We'll be sad to see you go, but we certainly do wish you well. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome Ronan MacDonald, who's joining the department. And actually we'll be adding to the support that we can provide. So it is only day 2 of Ronan's work in the department, so I won't ask you too many difficult questions today, Ronan, but maybe next month I will. So certainly today we'll give you a free pass. But it's good to have you on board, Ronan, and we want to work very closely with you and your colleagues to achieve the strategic objectives of the agency. Okay, so that's the end of my introductions. I think this comes to the point now on the agenda where we've got an open question and answer session. So, Rachel, do we have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. We've got a number of questions. I know we've got one question from Adela Nasa, who would like to ask her question on camera. So while the team are sorting out to bring her into the meeting, perhaps we'll start off with one of the other questions, which related to the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review. And it is specifically about valproate. So the questioner on that is saying, following on from the IMM DSR for valproate and the report from the Commission on Human Medicines on other anti-epileptic drugs in pregnancy, what warnings do the MHRA intend to publish to the public on the dangers of other anti-epileptic drugs prescribed to women of childbearing potential?
Okay, June, would you be able to take this one?
Well, thank you. And colleagues will be aware that there were clear messages from that review that 2 of the drugs, lamotrigine and levetiracetam, appeared safer in pregnancy. But we all know that no medicine's without risk. And it's quite good now to have the focus on, well, what about the other ones? And our commitment, obviously, as a result of this review, will be updating information for the other anti-epileptic drugs, and to do so in concert with patient organisations who've already helped us greatly with the materials that we were able to publish when the review came out. So there is more work to be done, and I can see that particularly our Valparate stakeholder network may be it would be a good forum for discussing some of that. You know, all drugs have the potential for adverse effects, and we've got to deliver on our commitment to be very open with patients when they're making, particularly a woman who's looking forward to having children, maybe pregnant already, having to make some tough decisions with a condition such as epilepsy. So more work to be done, but a clear commitment there that the safety profiles of the other anti-epileptic drugs will be updated as a result of that review.
Okay, well, thank you very much, June. Adela, is it possible for you to share your camera and to come off mute so you could ask your question? Adela is one of our senior scientists at the National Institute of Biological Standards and Control. Adela, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yes, this has been touched upon a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to know whether the MHRA was exploring more interactive ways of discussing patient concerns, in particular with the COVID vaccines, like other regulatory agencies have done, either through town hall meetings or live Q&A sessions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adela. June, would you like to take that one?
Well, really interesting thought. What we've done up to now, as you'll know, Adela, is worked in partnership with DHSC and taken up every opportunity to give the regulatory perspectives and answer questions in the broader picture of how vaccines are developed and delivered. And as you know, there's often a lot of questions about deployment where we need to turn to other colleagues, such as the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, NHS-EI, to help understanding of those questions. But I think just as this board is a great opportunity, I think we're very alive in our discussions on the future engagement strategy to the possibility of doing things more like EMA and FDA do. Very open to that. But clearly it's something the executive and the board would need to think through carefully first. I think in the heat of the moment, I hope you'll understand that the partnership approach we've taken has really been a very, I think, effective one. And speaking personally, I think we've been doing things with our engagement leads and in partnership with the NHS pretty much a couple of times every week, just to be there to be answering questions. But let's take it away and think about what more we could do.
Okay, well thank you, June. And Adela, you've obviously given us your permission to share your image today. So as you've got the floor, is there any other question you'd like to ask the board while you've got the opportunity?
No, thank you. I'm feeling quite nervous and shy now, so I'll just stop here. Thanks.
Thank you for contributing. We genuinely appreciate it. It's good to hear from our staff too, so appreciate that. But your ordeal is now over. Okay, Rachel, your ordeal is not over. So any further questions?
Yeah, there's a few other questions, some of which relate to papers that we've already considered. So perhaps if we take the one on the innovative licensing and access pathway ILAP first, and the questioner is asking when we are expecting to make the first announcements relating to treatments accepted onto the ILAP route, and how many announcements does the MHR expect on this during 2021?
Okay, so Sam, do you want to kick us off with this in terms of where we are with the development of ILAP?
Yep, so the ILAP process was launched obviously on the 1st of January this year, so fantastic to see that actually go out, and we've been having a lot of conversations already with a number of companies. When we're likely to announce that, I'm not sure is the honest answer to that. I think we need a little bit of an internal discussion and work with the companies as and when they come through. I think in terms of numbers, it's a difficult one to judge. I think, again, we have had a bit of modelling on this, but I think it will be a watching brief, to be honest. So probably not the most definitive answer there, but I think this is one to watch, and we're certainly working with industry and encouraging more and more submissions through this route.
Yeah. June, is there anything else you want to add in terms of our engagement with industry on this and reactions so far? Think of the pilots in particular.
Endorsing what Sam has said, it's a fast developing picture, so it would be premature really to give any definitive numbers or names today. But industry's been really extremely interested, and I think a bit like our previous initiative around early access and the promising innovative medicine designation, what we're seeing now, the target development profile and the innovation passport, they're really things that are helpful to industry to know that there's a pathway that will be followed. So in due time, I hope we'll be able to be publishing and making announcements, but at this stage, it's very much working closely with industry.
But I think what was really encouraging actually in this area, there was 3 or was it 4 companies actually volunteered for pilots, at a very early stage. So I think that shows that people were volunteering to get involved in this process before we'd even developed it. So I think that demonstrates in real time that there is a genuine industry interest out there, and our intention is to make it as successful as it can be. Okay, so Rachel, another question.
So if we go back to the paper that Bruce and John brought on the devices registry, there's a question about how the registry will impact on the quality control of devices as well, and how will devices be monitored in the future?
Okay, so who should we pick? I'll start with John, and I'm sure Bruce might have an external perspective too.
Thank you. I think it kind of depends which area. So with post-market surveillance, I think this will be really significantly improved because we'll be bringing that data together and being able to monitor it. So I think that will help. With UDI, because that's international, that's going to enable us to work internationally on that data too. So I think in that area, it's positive. In quality control in the manufacturing environment, I'm not really sure this will address those areas. That's mainly covered by ISO standards, as I understand it.
Sam, you've got a lot of experience in quality control areas. Do you see any application of this particular system that could help with that?
Maybe I could just talk a little bit more broadly, actually, if you don't mind, Chair. I mean, when we start thinking about this, we've got to think that we've obviously got the bill coming through, and there are certain things that are going to be enabled by the powers that are currently going through with that, obviously, and then into our own UK legislation in future. I think there are a couple of things to say. So from a sort of getting products to market perspective, there's a number of ways we manage sort of quality of products, and that's through legislation, guidance, standard setting. We've obviously had the target product profiles coming out for some of the products, which helps with all of the quality and consistency of products. Post-market, then it comes down to it's probably more of an internal focus for the organisation. So improving the breadth of quality of the data we have. And John's right, some of what's putting in place with the registries will help with that. Improving how we manage the data and what we understand from that. So our analysis and interpretation also has to happen. Influencing and improving public health outcomes as a result of that. So that's really around achieving this and achieving the deliverable, which is obviously what we want to see is improved outcomes. But overall, it's quite an interesting time for devices. We've got some great opportunities, and the other area which we haven't touched on, which I would like just to mention, is the changes with enforcement. So the enforcement regime historically has relied on something which is called the Consumer Protection Act to undertake enforcement activities, and it's not totally well suited. So we've got opportunities going forwards here as well. So when you pull it all together as a package, it's a much more positive position.
Yeah, you see, I think that's really good actually, Sam, because I think it demonstrates the breadth of quality control in many different ways, both internally, externally, and going right through to the enforcement at the far end too. So I think it has many applications. So I think there's many opportunities for improvement of quality. Bruce, is there anything else that you want to add in terms of the benefits that you see in terms of quality control?
I think I just mentioned the actual phrase total product life cycle. Which is, the way that devices should be evaluated from the very first moment they're designed on a bench right through to using them in the real world environment. And I think that the system that's being proposed will so greatly increase the quality of data that we get once they're on the market, that manufacturers and everybody else will have the huge influence on how they think, how they redesign products, and really all aspects of their safety.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice summary, actually. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. Rachel, another topic.
Yeah, so there's also a follow-up question on patient-reported outcomes. And the questioner is asking how the new emphasis on patient-reported outcomes will be integrated into the MHRA's overall strategy.
Okay, June, can you sort of maybe help us with this one?
Well, happy to kick off, and maybe Christian would like to follow up too. Certainly, we would see this as part of our relook at the clinical trial environment, and colleagues will be aware that we've worked closely with the Office of Life Sciences to really make strategic thoughts and plans around making the UK a great place for companies to develop innovative products. And patient-reported outcomes, if it's seen as being a really special offer that we will help develop, will then, I think, be a very a much more attractive offering. But I think it comes down to what we're being asked in terms of the clinical trials development. We'll be talking a little bit later about the emphasis we'll make on our early part of the life cycle and making it easy for small and medium enterprises and other, a whole range of companies to get their trials up and running. So the more we can make patient-reported outcome measures systematic in that, the more likely we are to deliver products that are authorised, approved, or on the market in ways that patients can see the benefit is relevant to them. So it's rather a long-winded way of saying it's part of our clinical trials strategy. But I think, as I'm mentioning, it's all part of what Christian's doing on his work too.
Okay, Christian, do you want to, obviously you mentioned patient-reported outcomes earlier. Do you want to just add a little bit more meat on the bones?
Thanks, indeed. So there's two components, well, three components to this. The first one is the research component. That is the one that I mentioned. But of course, research cannot be done in its own right, and then we have done research and that's it. It has to find into the second component, which is what June just said, which is actually to accept patient-reported outcomes and also to propagate and promote them in clinical trials as accepted endpoints. And that's the third component we need to work on, which is the international acceptance as well. So I think we have to lead the way here a bit, because if it's a UK only clinical trial, then of course it's in our own remit what we do. If it's a multinational trial, it is a bit more difficult because then there might be different decisions from other regulators. Still, if, for example, a patient-reported outcome was a so-called secondary endpoint, that means that it's not the primary endpoint, which is maybe an objective endpoint, but the secondary endpoint, we could actually take a brave step and say, this is part of our strong decision-making, that we're looking at this secondary endpoint very, very tightly, and that we would actually accept it. That might well be in divergence with other regulators who would only look at the primary endpoint and maybe then say we make a different decision. This is why our international partners, I think, will also have to be warmed up for this idea and this concept, and I'm sure they are, because many, many agencies are actually also looking at engaging patients. But I think it is an important aspect that we are leading the way here, and that we are making this as our overall approach. So I'm very grateful for this question, because I think this is indeed a great one. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Christine. I appreciate it you've added there. Rachel, another topic.
we've just got two final questions, which actually take us back to kind of where we started on vaccines. So the first of those is that rollout is steaming ahead, but the second jabs will mean fewer vaccines available for new groups. Is this acknowledged by the public, i.e. that there will be a slowdown in mid-March?
So, June, do you want to take us that one?
This is a really important area where DHSC and NHSEI are on the job day and night. Yes, there'll be needing to be catch up, but I think it will be at the time when the first round of vaccines has had maximum deployment. And don't forget, as I indicated earlier, that there will be new vaccines coming in. We're really focused on the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca. Then we'll be getting Moderna, and there could well be others coming in. So how you factor in how to get the second jabs in not longer than 12 weeks from the first, but still maintain your maximum population coverage. That's a job for the clever modelers and deployers. But I think our role is absolutely there to make sure the approvals, the conditions are appropriate, and that we're marching alongside those that are making the tricky decisions with all our batch releases coming through. So don't worry, finger on the pulse every day.
I never doubted it, June. I never doubted it. Rachel, the final question?
And the final question, again, relates a bit to the second dose. So this question says that AstraZeneca's Menopanglos said that its vaccine may be most effective at an 8 to 12 week interval between the first and the second dose. And is the MHRA looking at this?
So June, do you want to take that one too?
Yes, certainly. But like we've heard throughout this meeting, we're not alone. And thankfully, Public Health England, a number of groups are really watching this. And I think I'm confident that that's what's being monitored. And even so, the news that maybe some other countries are thinking of spacing their doses a bit for the same important benefit is something that's really encouraging. But yes, there will be data on this that backs it up. The AstraZeneca data up to 12 weeks were robust, and we'll watch closely what happens in the deployment in the population out there together with PHE.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've covered all of the questions from the public. So again, thank you very much to everybody who's taken the trouble to write those in. Hopefully you found the answers informative. You know, we've tried to be as straightforward and as direct as we possibly can. So thank you for that. The other point on my introductions, which I was unable to mention earlier, was just about, I also understand it's Elizabeth and Neil's last meeting. So Elizabeth is our government legal advisor, and her and her team have done an enormous amount of work with statutory instruments, the bill that's going through the House of Lords at the moment. We really couldn't have managed it without you, Elizabeth. So I understand you're moving on to pastures new. So again, thank you for your support. Thank you very much for that, and also good luck for your future appointment. And I understand that you'll be replaced by Fleur Ruder, so who will be taking over very shortly, I believe. So good luck to you, and thank you for your efforts. So I'm sorry I'm doing all the introductions at the end, but that was unfortunately my internet connection. So again, I do apologise for the challenges with technology today. It hasn't been completely straightforward, unfortunately, so very much apologise for that. But I think we've still managed to cover, you know, the key points on the agenda, which I think is important. And I think there's been a number of papers today around, you know, enabling healthcare access and ensuring patient safety, two of the fundamental aims of this agency. And I think actually some of the detailed conversations we've had demonstrate that we're on a really good path here. We want to get better, and we're actually working very, very hard to achieve those particular aims. So thank you very much for your input this morning. Thank you to members of the public for joining us. I'd now like to declare the meeting closed. So thank you very much and have a good day. Bye-bye.